reflection of which you would have everyone here. Amen. Amen. All right. We are starting a new sermon series called Missio Dei. It's the mission of God. It's just that fancy Latin phrase that means mission of God. We're kind of looking at the heart of God and what we're doing here. I already told you about the book, and I got to be honest with you. Let's see. I don't know what happened, but my phone just disconnected from the computer in the back. I cannot control, so I'm out to acting like I'm in the 90s with this thing, right? Like so which is a little issue because I can kind of see my next slide. So let's see how we do today. But so this mission of God is this kind of this thing that we understand, like that God is sending us out. He's doing all these things. And our verse today that's found in that first week of that book that I showed you, that our first verse is John chapter 20, verse 19. And Jesus said to them, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you." Like, oh, that's nice, right? That's like nice Christian sending verse. Like, oh yeah, God is sending Jesus and he's sending us out, like going out into the great mission field. I feel so inspired to go out, right? Like that's like that. Yeah, like so how are you doing with this? You feel like you're being sent well? Do you feel like you're doing well? Like all those things? Like things are going great? Like, or do you look at this phrase and you're like, yeah, I get Jesus. I get that the Father sent you, but you're good at this. And I know Betty. Betty's good at it. But me, not so much, right? Like I'm not so good at that sending thing. I'm not so good. I'm worried that it might not go so well. I'm worried that someone will reject me, or maybe if I do it wrong enough that God, you will reject me, right? I'm worried about that. And this is something that is near and dear to my heart when it comes to this stuff. And if you listen to me long enough, you'll start getting this more and more. As American Christians, we have a big hindrance with us in the faith. And that hindrance is that we tend to be very black and white about things. That you are either do all the good things and you go to the good place, or you do the bad things and you go to the bad place. No wiggle room, right? And I think that worries us when God, man, my microphone is being annoying today. It knows that I rejected it last week when I was on vacation, and it's warring against me today. So we know that we have this sense of like, oh, if I do the bad things, and we kind of like, oh no, like what if I do the sending thing wrong? What if I mess up? Will I go to that bad place then? Will I slip up, right? Or what happens if I'm just not feeling it? What if in the faith I'm just not feeling God that day, or I haven't felt God in over a year? Like I see those people down the aisle from me and they're always just like, oh, God is just doing this for me, and I just don't feel that way about it. And I've tried to do all these things. When I think about these things like right here, it always helps me to remember, whose mission is it on this mission of God? Whose mission is it? And to find clarity in that, I have these old stories that I like. I call them the old rabbi stories. And I love these stories because they're all kind of they're all centered around this old teacher, this old rabbi. And this old rabbi is kind of just over it now. Like he's not worried about trying to impress God anymore. He's not worried about going to the bad place anymore. He knows that he's in God's grasp. And this one day, this young man comes running up to the old rabbi, and he's, Rabbi, I just don't feel like God's around anymore. I don't think he's close to me. I don't feel it anymore. I used to feel it all the time, and I've been doing all these things trying to feel like God is here with me again. That God is around me and he's near me. I've been trying to read the Bible every day. I've read through the whole thing this last year, right? About one of those Bibles. I've been trying to listen to all these speakers talk. I try to pay attention and make notes on the sermon, even though that's impossible. I try to go to church or synagogue this amount of times. I try to be perfect in all these ways, and it just feels like God just isn't there anymore. And I'm worried that it's just, this is how it's always going to be. And the rabbi didn't try to explain anything. He just took him outside. There's a nice, beautiful South Florida summer day. The heat is just immediately hitting your face, right? And he told the guy, look up at that tree and see how the Spirit of God is moving and animating the creation, causing the trees' leaves to clap their hands. See how the Spirit of God, that wind of God, is just blowing through your hair. Feel it there. The English language does us a disservice. English has separated wind, breath, and spirit into three words where we would never confuse them, right? You cannot say wind and breath is the same thing, or spirit in English, right? No matter which way it is, right? That's just, we can't do that. And yet, in Greek and Hebrew, wind, breath, and spirit is the same word, right? Now, we have that verse that we started off with. Let's go to the next one. So Jesus said to them again, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, receive the Holy Spirit. Now, one hopes when Jesus breathed on them that when he resurrected from the tomb, because this is right after he raised from the dead, that he wasn't just I need some garlic knots really bad, right? Hopefully that's not what happened, where he's I got to have them knots, and he's just how you doing, disciples? It's so good to see you, right? And it's just awful breath just coming at him right there, especially as he's breathing him. But when you connect those three words of breath, spirit, and wind, you can see what's going on here, right? That's he spirited on them. He winded on them, which in English, that's a bad way of doing it too, but he breathed on them. And the question that you have to ask yourself is what's going on here? Well, this is just after the crucifixion, right? This is just after Jesus died and was arrested and has risen again. But what did the disciples do before the crucifixion? They all left Jesus, didn't they? They all forsook him. They all betrayed him. And now Jesus died on the cross, and they are in this room locked. Why is it locked? Because they have no friends left in this world. The people who killed Jesus probably want to kill them. I'm not sure they really want to see Jesus again after hightailing it away from them, right? They're probably worried that God himself and Jesus there would probably reject them just as they did to him. But he comes and he breathes on them. On those worthless, rejected things, the ones who are not good enough, the ones that have failed, the ones that feel not close to God at all. He breathes on them. And I'm telling you today that from the very beginning, God always brings his breath and he speaks peace to those things that even are worthless and all that. Because remember at the beginning, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, when I grew up under a tradition that said this about the creation story. We know about, like the 6 days of creation and all that stuff. When I grew up, I don't know if I was taught this or I just received this in some way, but the creation story, the 6 days of creation, served one purpose, and that was to prove that God created the world rather than evolution. What? I look back now and I see that my theological understanding, my faith, was just this big. Was just so small. And the problem is that when the creation, when those 6 days of creation only serve to be as a defense against evolution or something like that, you end up missing things. And we know that God created the world, right? But verse 2, we end up leaving that one out. And this is Genesis 1, verse 2. And it says this, that the earth was without form and void, and the darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit, the wind, the breath of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, when I was thinking as a younger person, 6 years ago, when I was thinking as someone in my 30s, as I was thinking about then, in creation, I always had in my hand, it was when God spoke and bang, it happened. There's stuff around here. And what is it? It says the earth was formless and void. Darkness was around it. And as I think and am honest about my own struggles in my life, there are times, whether it's when people don't laugh at my jokes and sermons, or if there's actually something really serious that I'm going through, that I can feel like I'm formless and void, that the light is nowhere near me, that I don't know what's going on. And you see from the very beginning of creation, in the second verse, you see that God is right there with his breath, the Spirit. Remember, that's the same word. It's ruach. It's actually ruach. Ruach, wind, spirit, breath. That this breath of God is hovering over the face of the waters. And then he begins with that breathy voice of God to speak peace into the creation. And he says, let there be light. And he continues speaking. He says, separate the waters from above from the waters below. We'll call it sky and sea. And then he speaks, and dry land gets pulled up out of the waters. And then he continues to speak, and he fills out the light with the sun, moon, stars, and all those heavenly beings. And then he fills out the sky and the air with birds and the fish of the sea. And then he fills out on the sixth day all the things that creep on the moon, on the surface of the ground, all the things that creep and move, and all those stuff. He breathes and speaks peace and creates all of this order out of the chaos from before. And then in chapter 2, he creates Adam. And Adam is one of these funny things to me, because we give Adam a name. In Hebrew, Adam is just Adam. A man is just Adam. If you have a friend named Adam and you say, hey man, you are literally calling him by his name. Right? That's what his name is, right? It's like, hey man, and you think, and what a generic term, right? And you think about how God made Adam. It's just filled with all these generic things. It's just the dust of the ground. It's the things we routinely always walk on, the things that we walk over, we shake off of our toes and feet, and why we have to vacuum out our floor mats on our cars, right? Is because the dust gets on it, and that is what Adam is made of. He's just almost like formless and void and nothing, and yet God comes to him and breathes into his nostrils, spirits into his nostrils, and animates his life. And Adam stands up and can walk and talk and make bad jokes and make dad puns, and can cry and laugh and say all these things. The Spirit of God caused Adam to be animated, just like that rabbi looked in the sea, in the leaves, clapping their hands, animated by the Spirit of God. Do you see it? Because this is always happening. This is how God works and how he does all these things. We can see this happening story after story, that this is how God works, that he doesn't go after all the people with all the right stuff. He doesn't go after the ones that just want to win, right? He goes after the ones that have been rejected. The ones that feel like they've been rejected. The ones that feel like there's no connection to the holy anymore. He goes after those people that are even need freedom from being slaves. Goes after those people that feel like they are held captive. Because that's what he did. He went after his own people when he found them to be enslaved to Egypt. And he pulled them out of there. And yet he speaks peace again to them through that breathy voice of Moses when he says, "Let my people go." And he even speaks peace when he had Charlton Heston in the form of Moses speak, and the waters, speak peace over the waters, and they split. Now this is cool. I'm going to test your memory. You got to bury the lead a little bit here, Ed. And you too, Shirley. You too. You can wait just for a second. When Moses, parts the Red Sea, which God does, right? What parts the sea? That's not the staff. Well, the staff is helping, but there's something that says it comes and it doesn't. Wind. I got to start not allowing you to answer either. Yeah, like that's. I have my list of people that probably know, right? Like that's. But wind. It says a wind comes from the north and causes the sea to be. Now our science brain are like, oh, okay, there was like a big gale force wind. No, like read the Bible. It's Ruach, the Ruach of God. Like the breath of God, the Spirit of God comes and he's breathing peace upon the people because there's a dangerous sea of death in front of them and there's a dangerous sea of Egyptian soldiers behind them, and he comes and he brings them to safety by the Spirit of God. This is how God works. I mean, that even happens when they're picking out, when Samuel is looking for King David. He goes to David's father and he's like, God tells me that there is a king amongst your sons here. Line them up. And his father lines up all the kings, and Samuel goes to each one. He's like, it's not this one. It's not this one. This one's very handsome, but it's not him. Like, yeah, and he just keeps going down the line. It's none of these. And he's like, none of these are, do you have any other sons? And his father's like, yeah, I do. But he's just the smallest one. He doesn't matter. He was rejected. There's no way he could be king, right? He's still working out in the fields. And he's like, yeah, that's the one. That's the one, right? This is how God works. This is how God does all these things. And this has become such an integral part of the Hebrew understanding of life and how God works that the Pharisees and the religious leaders and those scribes of the day, those old rabbis, they codified it into their worship language, into the Psalms. And in Psalm 118, it says this: the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And then they're like, this is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. He goes, this is a stone that the builders rejected. Now, as Christians, who is the stone that the builders rejected? Jesus. You guys were a little hesitant on that. Everyone can answer on that one. That's all right. Like that's like Jesus, right? Like Jesus said it in the parable of the tenants. That he's the stone that the builders rejected. And we see that the religious leaders, the political leaders, even our own selfish wants of power, we led Jesus to the cross. We took him there, that we rejected him, and yet by the cross and the resurrection, our Christianity rests firmly with both feet. This isn't like just some half foot. It's like I have one foot on Jesus, and then I'll also find salvation in chocolate pudding. No, that's not how it works. Like we both put all of our weight in the cornerstone of Jesus, right? That he is the stone that the builders rejected and has become the cornerstone. Now, I want to play with you guys just a little bit here, all right? I like to have fun with theology. I realize that you guys might not have fun in the same ways that I do, right? I realize I'm weird, that I like different things, okay? And the reason why I have to present it like this is because I'm not really sure it's all that much of a golden idea to theology alone. But I think this is a fun idea here. You ready? What does Peter's name mean? The rock, right? Like the stone. And you remember what Jesus said about Peter. He kind of changed his name from Simon to Peter in this kind of moment here. That he looks at Peter and he's like, you're the rock, and on you, or on this rock, I'm going to establish my church, right? I'm going to establish my church. Incredible, right? How well did that rock of Peter sustain itself? Like barely 5 verses or something like that, right? Like, and all of a sudden Jesus starts talking about his death and resurrection, and Peter's like, nah, that's not how it's going to be. And then Jesus calls him Satan, and it's like all that stuff. But we see that rock, that Jesus established the church, we even see that it fails Jesus, that it rejects Jesus itself, right? That it turns away from Jesus 3 times before that rooster crows. And I could even say that those disciples all were kind of like rocks in and of themselves, confessing Christ, but they all rejected Jesus. They're all their own forms of rejected stones there. And now they are there in a locked room, scared for their lives. And Jesus comes to all these guys, all these rejected stones, and he breathes peace onto them. He breathes peace onto each one of them. And that's how the Lord sends us out. That is how the Lord accomplishes his missions. He breathes on them just like he breathed at the beginning. He breathes on them just like when his people were enslaved. Just like all the times that he accomplished his mission. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little story that kind of shows this, I think, pretty well. It's from this book. It's from today's little thing. I'll put this on the website this week, probably Tuesday. I'll put a link to this book on the website on the sermon series page if you're interested in it. But here's a last little story. A young missionary, fresh from seminary, was being introduced to a village of indigenous people by the missionary that he would replace. The new arrival responded to his introduction by saying this: "In the wisdom of God and in accordance with the proper procedures of the church, following my matriculation with a Master's of Sacred Theology degree and ordination into the holy ministry, I stand before you as humble steward of the mysteries of God and announce the sacred Kirigima of Christ." The chief of the village looked quizzically at the old missionary and asked, "What did he just say?" And this wise veteran of years of service in the mission field simply smiled and said, "This young man wants you to know that Jesus sent him here to your village with some really good news." It's important to remember whose mission it is, but even when we forget, even when we fail, even when we feel formless and void, like we can't do it, the Lord still accomplishes his mission through all of us, the stone the builders rejected, becoming the cornerstone. And I think that's good news. And we'll end right there. Let's say